So here we are with Bob Atkinson. And I've had the good pleasure, as I said before, to know him and work with him on the Evolutionary Leaders Network. And today we get to learn more about his exploits as an author and supporting other authors. And let's just start with a little bit about your background, Bob. You've written quite a bit. You contributed and really helped make our moment of choice happen. And we've promoted that a couple times on our show. And then you have this other wonderful book. So tell us a little bit about your background and experience as an author and how you've used writing as your way to help create an awakening world.
Sure. Great to be with you, Scott.
Yeah.
Well, after an academic career of about 30 years as a professor at a university, where I did write some books there too, but they were kind of focused more on developmental psychology and life story interviewing, with a little bit of what I'm doing now in the background there. So after becoming a professor emeritus, I really started focusing more on the consciousness of evolution, and that took me in a number of directions, as you mentioned, with co-editing Our Moment of Choice with Kurt Johnson and Deborah Moldow, with over 40 evolutionary leaders contributing to that. And that was a Nautilus Book Award winner. And I've had two other Nautilus Book Awards since, one just before that. In 2017, I wrote The Story of Our Time, From Duality to Interconnectedness to Oneness. And that was also, I guess I did mention, a Nautilus Book Award winner for that too. And then after Our Moment of Choice, my most recent book is A New Story of Wholeness. And that's really a guidebook, a workbook, a workshop in print to write one's own story of wholeness that begins with the process of hearing and heeding the call to wholeness, which is followed by undergoing a path to purification. And then the third part of that journey is the return to wholeness. So the second part of that book really is an in-depth guided process that anyone can follow to tell their own story in that universal pattern, which I'll say more about, I guess, when we get to talk about the awakening of humanity.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm going to your website. And by the way, everybody, this is his website, which is his name, robertatkinson.net. And there's the book, A New Story of Wholeness. And I'm actually going to read a couple of beautiful quotes. Of course, we all love Reverend Michael Beckwith. He's been on the show many times. And Michael writes, "A new story of wholeness asserts itself among the great texts on spiritual evolution and unity consciousness, allowing us to create and share a new narrative grounded in love, harmony, and interconnection. Study this guide. Your new life awaits you." And that's a pretty powerful recommendation from one of our favorite spiritual teachers, Bob.
It is, yes. I definitely appreciate his thoughts on that.
So the thing that I've noticed as I've gotten to know you and read about you is how you weave mysticism, spirituality, science into your understanding of humanity. And I'd just love for you to talk about that for a moment and really maybe more in your personal journey of life.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That actually goes back to my own journey. When I was in my mid-20s, I had the great fortune of meeting Joseph Campbell at one of his Cooper Union talks in New York City in 1970. And that was at a time in my life when I was in the midst of the journey that I went to a lecture of his that he was talking about, which came from his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he calls that the monomyth because it's really the one myth that all cultures have in common with each other. And so that I became very familiar with that. And then at the same time, and somewhat before that, and during that time, and after as well, I was continuing my own study of comparative religions, which included mysticism. And from a master's program in American folk culture, I became familiar with traditional rites of passage and all of that. And I began to recognize that what I found in the monomyth, what Joseph Campbell had described as the one myth common to all cultures, that pattern was also present in traditional rites of passage. It was also present in the mystic way, and it was even present in psychology with Carl Jung's individuation process. So and there's many variations on that, and it's also very common to. I mean, it's the basic story structure. We're all familiar with beginning, middle, and end, but that's not really what it's all about. There's a deeper level to that, and just from the story model, we can think of it more accurately as beginning, muddle, and resolution. And the muddle is what we will all experience in our lives as challenges and crises and moments of despair that turn into a process of transformation that ultimately lead us to the intended resolution. So I found all those ways of knowing had that one thing in common. And you know, from mythology to mysticism to rites of passage to story itself. And they all also at the same time are representations of what we also call in the book that we'll get to in a minute. They're also examples of unitive narratives, which is
Mhm.
which in its simplest form means stories or narratives that bring about unity. So that's what they're all for. Rites of passage exist to bring about unity at a higher level in the community for the young person going through the rite of passage. And the mystic way, the same thing. It's about bringing about unity on a greater and greater level each time we experience that process of transformation. So that's a
Yeah,
quick.
I love that you're saying that, Bob, because as a coach, you know, my other life as a relationship coach, almost every session I have to remind people to make peace with the confusion, make peace with the not knowing. And especially in relationships that are struggling and challenged, there's like wanting to know, will you change? Will this work out? Will this be? And we have to be in the process and make peace with the not knowing, which is another way of saying what I'm hearing you speak to right now. So that's
Yeah,
powerful because we all want safety and we all want to think we know what's going to happen. And the truth is, none of us ever really know because life is life, right? So this leads
and
us to the book that we're talking about today, which of course is Awakening of Humanity, the Dawning of a New Earth and a Unitive Age. And essentially it's by these three brilliant people, Doug and Jude and Kurt, and we've already heard from Doug and Kurt tonight. But it says with a spotlight by Robert Atkinson. So tell us about your spotlight on this very, very beautiful and powerful book.
yeah. So a spotlight is a short piece that's really meant to sort of highlight some of the main themes and concepts in the book. So that's what my short piece does, and I've kind of touched on some of that already because in that short piece, in that spotlight, I do talk about the commonality, the universality of the process and pattern of transformation that all of those ways of knowing have, and how they're also at the same time all expressions of a unitive narrative. And the other context for this book and the spotlight in it is that it's really about a little different approach or perspective to understand the hollow movement from. So
Mhm.
what we've done here is, I mean, as you've probably already heard from Doug and Kurt, the hollow movement is the intent, is the inherent wholeness and motion of the entire universe, and that's comprised of the two orders that can be called formlessness and all things formed, or another way to look at those two orders might be uh, the changeless and all things changing. There's a variety of ways of looking at that, but the whole movement is really about how they are parallel paths or parallel riverbeds that eventually, as humanity evolves further and further to a higher and higher level of consciousness, those two riverbeds will converge into one, and we
Mm.
will become that will become the eventual reunion of the two orders. So I touch on that in the spotlight, also about how the whole of movement itself is the archetype or the first of its type to illustrate this spiraling, unfolding, and enfolding nature of evolution. So that's another way to think of the whole movement as a unitive narrative, is that it's really the first of its kind to describe what's happening in the universe, and how we, humanity, and all living things are part of that process, and and that it has a purpose to it, that there's a direction to it, and that direction, as I indicated, was toward a reunion of the changing with the changeless, and so it's all part of that. I mean, that's kind of what my spotlight summarizes. It's also, we say a little bit, or in the spotlight, I say a little bit about how the whole movement is also an expression of how other stories like it have become, are really carrying out the Hermetic principle of as above, so
Mm.
below, all things accomplishing the miracles of the one thing. And so we started out as the storytelling species, and humanity has gone off since its infancy. It's gone off in many directions in its childhood and adolescence. And what started out as a unitive narrative became got divided through all of the because of all of the conflict and chaos and conflicts and wars that have taken place. But we're in the where all of that is within the context of an evolutionary flow and impulse that is bringing them back together. And so we've reached a period now in our evolution where we are realizing, as we approach humanity's collective maturity and the dawning of the unitive age, we're realizing that the greatest need is for new stories of wholeness to frame this
Mm.
interconnectedness. And so that's what we're doing with the awakening of humanity, using the Holo movement as a context for that. And I bring in the various ways of knowing that I refer to as also essential parts of that whole thing,
Beautiful.
the
That's
whole
so beautifully
process.
stated, Bob. Beautifully stated. And thank you for being on this journey of awakening that we're all on, and playing your beautiful role and providing such powerful wisdom. So thank you very much. And again, a reminder to everybody that you can, if you're interested in learning more about Bob and his wonderful work and his books as well. And we'll do a whole show on his books one of these days. But there it is, A New Story of Wholeness. And you can find out all about Bob at robertatkinson.net. robertatkinson.net. And thank you, Bob, for for being a colleague and a friend. And thank you for being with us on the Awakening World.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. It's great to have this conversation with you. And I look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Take care, buddy.
Okay.